Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Douglas Romão, MVP Office Apps and Service, CTO Solutions Architect at Trentim, Brazil, who will be talking to you today about creating your custom connector to work with Logic apps. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC19. Don't forget to check out our resource center. This is packed with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. As part of Azure Week, we are adding blogs, ebooks, and webinars all this week. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link at the top. ESPC 19 team discounts allow you to book 4 tickets and receive your 5th ticket free. That's a huge 20% discount worth up to €1,795 for a huge amount of team learning and development. Join the best SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure practitioners in the world in Prague this December and go to the next level faster together. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com for further details. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Douglas in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Douglas Romão. Hello, Douglas.
Hello, Shane. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you in this webinar. So we are talking right now and today about how can we create some custom connectors to work with Logic apps. So as Shane said, I'm from Brazil. I'm an MVP here. I'll leave some contacts for you guys. So if you want to add me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter or check my YouTube, make yourself out there. There's some content about Azure and Office 365. So feel free to contact me there. It will be really good to talk to you and share some experiences and things like that. Okay, so as I said, we will talk about how can we create custom connectors to work with Logic apps. So I'm going to start talking about what is the Logic apps and how we can leverage the way that we can build things using the Logic app, so everyone knows how is it, what is it, and for what purpose we can use it. And then we will talk about how can we create custom connectors there. Okay. So to start with, Logic apps, it's basically a cloud services that Microsoft created that allows us to automate processes and create workflows and basically create a whole solution without needing without the need to code or to make something that it's developed. So if I don't know how to code and I want to start building things or automate my process, I can use Logic apps to do it. So, and also we can use that to work with online stuff and on-premises stuff. So we can basically integrate our whole solution or services in one place. And we have a lot of templates that Microsoft already created for us. So it's quite easy to start and to learn how can we use that in our daily basis. So I will create some examples so we can test it. And there are a lot of connectors that we can use to connect our stuff. So this is one of the things that are basically the main point of it's easy to automate things and to connect things that are, in the first place we had to think about how can we authenticate and how can we connect to the services, and if the services has an API or something that we can consume. So now we have a lot of existing things that we can just use it. So we can do things faster than before. And also we can use our custom APIs to do things. So for example, if we want to connect and do an automation process, and then we need to connect to our SAP or legacy system that we have inside our house, we can use that to connect through the logic apps. So we can use our applications together with other services, other cloud services, and in an easy way, basically. And this is a service inside Azure, so we can use and consume that together with other services that we have already there. Basically, the Logic Apps, it's part of an integrated offering that Microsoft does. So we have the web apps, we have the mobile apps, the API, and the Logic Apps. And this is a part of the solutions that we can use to put our APIs and automate our processes and create integration services and things like that. So it's part of these whole offerings that Microsoft does. And basically, by using these services and using Logic Apps, we have logs that we can control, so we can check whether this process is working fine, or if it's not, where is happening the issue, or how I can see the problems and how can I solve these problems in an easy way and fast way. We can control the access using roles or using groups and using the users that we have inside our Azure AD. So it's integrated to our Azure AD. We can use deployment lifecycle to control this. We can use versioning. We can use everything that it's available for us in an application. We can still using the Logic Apps and the other stuff related to that. And we can use on-premise things as well. One big thing about Logic Apps, and not only Logic Apps, if you are used to work with Office 365, you know Microsoft Flow probably, and you know that it's kind of similar. They are basically the same, between quotes, the same service, but one is inside Azure and the other is inside Office 365. But one of the main points of these two platforms is the way that we connect things. And this is the first and the best thing that we can use we can use here. And also is the leverage that we want if we can, or if we want to create a custom connector too, is the connectors. The connectors are basically services that Microsoft already provided together with the partners. And those connectors are made to help us to connect through services and pass parameters, pass actions, and make things together without knowing how this works behind the scenes. So for example, if I want to connect with Twitter and I want to get all the tweets from ASPC 19 and that are posted. So if everyone is posting about this using this hashtag, we can just connect through Twitter and get those tweets, and then maybe we can put it on SQL Server, or we can run an artificial intelligence to check the analysis, the sentiment analysis about these tweets, and see if the people are talking bad things or good things about ASPC. So this is one simple example of how can we connect things. And in this case, I don't want, or I don't need to know how the Twitter API works, how to authenticate, how to get the tweets using a hashtag. I don't need to know about it. I just need to know that I want to use the connector, the Twitter connector, and then we have a bunch of actions and triggers that we can use for these connectors, and then we can just use it. So it's pretty simple. And this is a good thing because there are a lot of connectors already available for us. talking about social media, talking about B2B things. So we have a lot of connectors that we can integrate our solutions with Office 365, of Azure things, and Microsoft and no more Microsoft things. So we are not talking only about Microsoft stuff here. So for example, if I want to integrate with Salesforce or with Oracle, and we have a lot of other services that we can use. So connectors are really good because it allows us to work with a lot of different services without really knowing how this works behind the scenes, and it's so fast to start working with that without needing to read the documentation, think about the authentication, and think about everything else. It's already there. We can just use it. So this is a good thing because business users or consumers can use that, and you see that not only developers can create logic apps, but also some users can do it because it's pretty simple. We have, for example, this sample here where we have the Twitter connector and the Dropbox connector. So we are talking about two non-Microsoft stuff. And when we get some tweets, we want to create a file with these tweets in the Dropbox. So this is one simple example where we have two connectors, and then we are sending parameters between them and use this to store data or to consume data from one place to another. So basically, we use the logic apps to orchestrate the APIs. So we can use some reference to get an action from one connector to send to another one, and we can create dependencies between them. So we can use some of the conditions to do it, like when we have the connector, the Twitter connector, we have some actions like get the search or search for tweets using a hashtag, or using a mention, or using a query string or something. And then we have some results or some outputs that we have from these connectors. So for example, we have all the tweets that were found using this search, and then with these results we can use in the other connectors sending these parameters, like for example, we can have the author of the tweet, we can have the description of this tweet, where this tweet was posted, when this tweet was posted. So we have a lot of outputs from one connector to another. So we have the action, we have the connection between the connectors, and also we have the outputs from one to another. So we can leverage that. And also we can make some expressions. So this is a little bit more complicated, or not complicated, but one thing that we need to learn a little bit to start working. So we have some expressions to work with strings, or work with dates, or things that we can use to make our functions or make our conditions more or a little bit more complex depending on our scenario. So we can use that as well. And then we can create some loops. So if we need to, for example, in this case, we will search for tweets, and probably we are going to get like 10 tweets. For example, we can limit this query, and then we can use the repeater to get the whole thing, or each one of these items, and do something. So we can go to all these 10 items, and then with all these 10 items for each one, we want to store this data in somewhere, or we want to send it to another connector that will check if the sentiment is good or not, and things like that. So we can use the repeating to go through our data and do things there. So it's pretty simple to understand what we are doing. Right now, I'm just trying to get a context for you guys, because then we will create some of them. We can have conditions, so we can check for conditions in our our workflows or processes here. It's pretty simple. And talking about the architecture, it's pretty simple because we can run parallels. We don't have a limitation of it. We just need to make sure that we are using the right resources, and then we are consuming the Azure in the right way. The structure is JSON, so it's pretty simple to understand what is going on and export these. If I want to move to another place or move to another environment, it's easy to get this structure and put in another place. So it's pretty simple to understand how it works and how the actions are there. But everything that I'm talking right now, it's something that we use like a designer to do it. We don't need to know the code behind the scenes. We don't need to know this JSON that I'm talking about. But behind the scenes is a JSON structure. So the definition is pretty simple. And then we can check all these actions and dependencies between the connections. We have a lot of functions already ready for us to use. We have some HTTP operations that we can use on our endpoint. So, for example, one logic app can be a trigger for a request that we do from another application. So this is a good thing. It supports a lot of different OAuth providers. So it's good that we can create our own authentication there and then integrate together with other connections or connectors that are using different types of authentication. And there are different ways to trigger, like I will show you guys, but basically we can trigger our workflow or trigger this process using a lot of different ways to do it, like recurrency, like to run one time per day or one time per week or one time per hour, or when something happened in a database or when something happened in a file server folder or something like that. So it's pretty simple and powerful. So this is basically the definition of logic app. We have parameters, we have triggers, we have actions and outputs. So it's a structure that we have. So if you need to check or if you need to maintain something related to your logic app, it's pretty simple. It's using this structure. Parameters is basically data types that we have to send some data from one to another and receive this data and processes and things like that. So you can create some parameters to work in our logic app. Triggers are basically the way that our workflow will start. So it's required for all the logic apps. So you need to have a trigger. And this trigger can be a lot of different things. We have actions. Basically, our workflow will have actions. These actions can run in parallel, can run different connectors and different things. So basically, we have these actions, and then the actions are basically the endpoints or the actions that we have for do things through the connector. So, for example, search for tweets or post a tweet is an action. In the same way that I'm talking about Twitter in this case, we can have, for example, our API, and we, for example, can have an API that will submit an order, a new order in our system, our ServiceNow or our service desk system inside the company. And then the action will be to send this data to this API and execute something. So actions are pretty much it. And then we have these expressions that we can use. This is just to show you some of the things that we can use when we are creating the app, the logic app. And it's basically a structured way to run some expressions and do things there. And there are a lot of documents. The documentation, it's really good for Microsoft, so you can see the expressions available. And so let's go to the demo. I want to show, this is just to give a context, but I would like to show you guys how this works for real. So I'm going to start by showing how we can create a logic app in Azure, because then we will create a connector for it. So basically, what I'm going to do here is to add a new resource, and then I will look for logic app. So it's pretty much it. You can create this logic app. So basically, it's talking about how can we design workflows here and do things. So when we are creating a logic app, we basically need to define a name for this. So I'm gonna put demo logic app 2. I'm gonna select the resource group, and then I can enable an analytic here. It will create some application insight thing. So it's good to enable if you want to track things on your logic app. So this will create basically a resource here in Azure. I'm gonna show you already a logic app working just to while these resources being created. So here in Azure, I have one logic app called Demo Azure Week 1. And then I'm gonna go to the designer, logic apps designer. And basically this is how we can create a logic app. The logic app is basically starting with a trigger. So we have a trigger here. And if you see, it's pretty simple and pretty easy to understand what is going on. So something is happening, and this logic app is starting by when an HTTP request is received. So we have a trigger to start this logic app. So in this case, our logic app will start when an HTTP request is received. And then we have a lot of configuration that we can do in this case. And we have a lot of different actions that I'm doing here. So I'm submitting a new order, I'm getting items. And what is these boxes here? These boxes are the connections or the actions that we are doing using the connectors. So basically, when we go to a logic app designer, we can create actions, and we can create parallel branches and then put different actions to run in parallel. But basically, when we are adding an action, we have all the connectors that I talked about. So if we choose, for example, Twitter, so I'm gonna show you guys that we can select different connectors. So Twitter, we can have, I think Facebook, it's still here. So Facebook, I have SQL Server, I have Salesforce. So we are talking about things that are Microsoft things and things that are not Microsoft things. Let me see if I can see Salesforce here. So I have a lot of different things. And in the first box here, we can see all the connectors, or we can see a lot of connectors that are available. So all of these are connectors available for you to use. And then when you select a connector, you can see all the actions for this connector, all the actions that are available for this connector. So for example, talking about Twitter, let me select Twitter, and then I can see all the actions available. I can post a tweet, I can search tweets, I can get my followers. And how is this working right now? Basically, when we are adding a connector, this will try to connect to the service through our username and password, or a key that I can create for an API or something like that. So basically, we need to check for each connector that we want to use, how is the authentication of this connector, and how we can connect to this, in this case. So for example, in Twitter, we are doing this using the username and password, but we have a lot of other connectors that are using an API key or something like that. So it depends on each connector. So when we are basically talking about connectors, let me see if the resource is already here. Yeah. Okay, so let me check. I will create the new logic app from scratch. Demo. Let me search here. Demo logic app 2. And then it will go to the logic app designer. And this is basically when we are starting from scratch. So it's basically saying to me, okay, Douglas, there are a lot of triggers that you can already use. So I have a lot of templates that I can use here to create my logic app. So for example, using the recurrence, delete old Azure blobs. So we have a lot of templates that we can use. So I can select productivity, I can select blockchain, I can select security. So you can do a lot of things. For example, you can automate the process of creating a user in your environment. So if in your company you need to create the Azure AD user, and then after that you need to create the user in the SAP and create the user in other different places and other different applications, you can create an automation process here. And then when the user fill a form and then submit this form, it will go to an approval, and then after this approval get done, we'll create the user in the Azure AD, we'll create the user in SAP, we'll create the user on Salesforce, and everything else in just one process. So this is a good example of the leverage that we can do by creating a logic app. So you can automate the whole process using this thing. I'm gonna create a logic app from blank just to show you guys how this works. And then when we are creating a logic app for the first time, we need to first select the trigger that we want to use. So we have a lot of different connectors to use, and for each connector we can create some. We can select which trigger will be used. For example, I can use the Azure DevOps, and then I have some triggers here. When a work item is created, start this logic app, or when a build completes, start this logic app. But then one good thing is that we can also create our own requests. So you can also create your API from here. So instead of creating an API in .NET Core or in Node.js, you can create the structure here, like using this request, and then you can request from some parameters, and then you will receive these parameters in your logic app and start doing something. And this is the example that I want to show you guys. So we'll use this trigger called request, and then we have this when a HTTP request is received. And then basically what is doing right now, it's basically we can create a structure that I want to receive. In this case, I want to receive an item, and this is just an example. So I can have, for example, a new order, and then I can receive an ID, and I can receive some description. And then when I use this JSON structure or this JSON sample, it will create the JSON schema for my HTTP requests. So basically this is helping me to create this action. And then I'm gonna create a new step here, and I will create, for example, an Azure DevOps. I will use the Azure DevOps to create a new work item. So in this example, I'm calling the logic apps, sending some parameters as item, ID, and description, and then I will create some a work item in my Azure DevOps. So I can select the account name, the project name, and if you can see here, we are basically just selecting things. We are not doing any code. We are just selecting things. And then a good thing that we have is, remember that I talked about the actions and the outputs of each action that we can use on the logic app. It's the same for Flow. So in this example, we can use dynamic content in each one of the connectors that we have here and the actions that we have here. And we can get parameters and this dynamic content from other places. So in this case, the connector that I have, the action that I have when an HTTP request is received, has two outputs, the item and the description. And then I can use this in my actions. So I can send some parameters from one place to another by basically using this dynamic content. So with the dynamic content, we can send some parameters or outputs from one connector to another. This is really good because then in this case, I'm receiving some data and then I'm passing this data to another connector to be used. So I can use the item, for example, and the description, I can put the description. Also, another good thing that we have here, it's the expressions. We have a lot of pre-built functions here, so I can convert to int, I can convert to float, I can do math functions, I can do date functions. So there are a lot of expressions that you can use. So basically, I just created a workflow here that will receive some data and do some action. I will save this logic app here. And then once I saved, an HTTP post URL was generated here. This is the endpoint for my logic app, and then I can copy. I will just test it using Postman. So we can use these to request or to execute some actions. So I can put here, select post, and then I will put the body will be the same structure that I asked it when I was creating the logic app. So I'm asking for an item that is string. I'm asking for an ID that is integer, and then I am asking for a description that is also a string. So I'm basically creating the same structure. The item will be a new task to be done. The description will be, this is the description, and the ID will be 1. And then basically in Postman, I can just send it, this action. This just returned accepted. So probably my logic apps already ran. So I can check here the executions. So I'm gonna refresh. And I can see that there are history here that I can see what happened in this execution. So this is a good thing also because we can check what or which data we received. So we received these 3 data here structure, and then what happened. And if something goes wrong, we can also see what happened. So this is good, really good. So if I go to my Azure DevOps, I can see that there is a new item here that was created automatically. So this is good because I didn't create anything by code. I didn't do anything using any programming language and anything else. Was just using some logic and some connectors that are already available for me. So this is really good. But what about what if I need to connect this structure here with an application that I have? I have my own API and I have my own actions. I need to do a bunch of internal stuff and send to a legacy system that I have here. What if I need, or I have this need here in my company? How can I solve this problem? So in the same way that we have all these connectors available, there are connectors that Microsoft is creating together with partners. We can also create our own connectors. So basically, you can use your API to create a connector here, and this connector will be available in your structure or in your environment only. And you can also create some connectors to sell if you want to create a service and get this service available for other customers to use. You can also create these connectors and get it available for other places or other environments. So this is good. This is really good. So all the custom connectors will be inside this custom tab. I'm gonna show you just one connector that I created. I created this demo custom connector one that have two actions. I didn't create any triggers, but I created some actions. And then I'm gonna show you guys how we can create these custom connectors. So basically what I have here, I have an API that I created. It's a simple API with basically two endpoints, one endpoint to get items, and this is just a demo. So basically I have a list of items, and then I'm calling this get item endpoint, and if I send an ID, we'll search for this ID inside this list, and if I send an ID as 0 or don't send an ID, we'll get everything. And I have um, another call here that is to submit a new order, and we'll just return a string. So in this example, we could have like call legacy system here. We could call another API. So you can create your API and do whatever you want. And this API, it's basically deployed inside our Azure as well. And what I need to do is create a connector that will call these actions. So I don't need to know what is happening inside here. I just need to create the structure of this request in my custom connector. So for example, this is calling the same API, and I have this call get items. And then I have an action called get items. And when I put this get items, it's requesting the ID. So I can create a lot of parameters here to receive in my action, and my endpoint will receive this data and do a lot of things, and I don't need to give to the customer or give to the user what is happening. It's just call this connector, call this endpoint, and this will give some outputs and we'll use, but then we can create a bunch of connectors and actions and triggers and get it available for my entire company, and they will use in a lot of different logic apps without knowing what is happening. They just know that they need to send an ID here, and they will receive a result. So just to show you guys how this is working, in this API that I created, I have this endpoint. It's a get endpoint. And then if I send the ID here, I will get only the item that is related to this ID. And if I send 0 or don't send an ID, it will returns everything. So it's returning the item 1, 2, and 3. So basically I have a simple endpoint. And then what I need to do is creating a connector that will call these actions and call these endpoints and get it available to the other users. So basically, this is one good way that you can put your endpoints to work for you in a simple way for your user. So you as a developer can create endpoints and then get it available for other people to work with. So I'm gonna go to the create a new resource, and then I'll put logic custom connector. It's logic apps custom connector, the resource. And then I will create. And then I'm gonna put demo custom connector 2, select the resource group. I will create. A good thing about creating logic apps custom connectors is that you can put your endpoints when you are creating, or you can also use a structure that you already have in the Postman. So if you have your entire API in the Postman, the structure, the calls, the requests here, you can export this JSON and import, and it will create for you. Okay, so let's wait a little bit while it's creating. I will edit the custom connector that I have created in the first place, the connector 1. This is the screen to create a connector. So the first thing that you need to decide if this connector is REST or SOAP. The SOAP is in preview. The way that you can import, if you have already an OpenAPI file or an OpenAPI URL, you can just put it here, and it will try to get all the endpoints that you have there and import as actions. So this is really good. And as I said, you can also import a Postman collection. So if you have all the requests already created here in the Postman, you can just export as this collection and then import here. And it's important to know that it's only the V1 collection that you can use it. And then after that, you can put some general information for this connector. So you can upload this picture. This picture is used, let me show you, this user here is used here. So you can define your logo or whatever. The name of this, the description of this connector, the background color and things like that. And then the first important thing is the scheme that you need to select it if it is HTTPS or HTTP. And in my case, I just created with the domain here and the base URL for my API. So the structure that you use here depends on your API structure, but it's basically host and the base URL, and all the endpoints will be created when we put the actions. So this is the first configuration that we need to do, the scheme. And then the second configuration, so you can see that it's pretty simple. It's just 3 steps to create your connector. The second step is the security. So you can define if it will use an authentication here. I'm not using, but you can use OAuth and API key or basic authentication. It depends your needs, basically. So you can implement the security here. And then we have the definition. This is the most important part, where I have the actions of my connector, I have my triggers, and I have the references that my connector is using. So in this case, I can create a bunch of actions here, and those actions will be displayed when we are using this this connector. So for example, let me put here the actions there. If we create a parallel between this and the Twitter, for example, here we have the actions. So I can get followers, get following, get my followers, and things like that. So those actions are the same that we will create here. So I can have different endpoints, and each endpoint will be an action, like get items, as we have in our API, submit a new order, and things like that. So basically you need to create actions, and you can also create triggers. So when something happens in your API or in your legacy system, we'll do something. So you can create this structure here as well. Okay, so let me rush here a little bit. Let me see if the resource was created already. Just to show you guys, yes, was. So I'm going to the custom connector 2. I'm gonna edit, and then I will create the same structure. Let me just copy from here, put API. I'm not adding any authentication, and the definition will be empty, and then I will create a new action. And then this is the title of the action, so I can put get items. This is just to be easy to the user to use. I need to put an operation ID, so this is just to have a structure. And then I will start creating the requests, and then I can import the structure that I want to use. So in my case here, I have the slash API slash demo and then the ID. So I can just copy from after the API. That is the thing that I'm already have there. So slash demo slash, I can put parameters here. So I want to receive the ID, and this is a get. I can just import, and then once I import, the URL will be here, displaying to me the path with the ID as a parameter, and then I can send some body or headers if I want to, or query strings. So this is pretty simple to structure. The response, I can tell to the connector what is the response, or I can just use the default. It will identify once I run this thing. And then I can create some validation as well. And then it's pretty much it. I can just update this connector. And a good thing is that I have a Swagger editor here that I can just enable and test if it's working. So I can try it out, my custom connector. I can see the definition here, and I can try out. So if I call 2 in the ID, it needs to return something. So if I go to the API and put 2, it will return this structure, and then I can see that the result is the same. And I can just quickly change here to show you, and we'll get the item 3. Okay, so my connector is ready. It's basically it. I don't need to do anything else. And then if I go to my Logic Apps Designer, I will just refresh it. I will edit this Logic App, and then I will add an action and ask for custom. And then I can see that there is this demo custom connector too. And only the action that I just created, these get items. It will create a connection for this connector. So every time that we are creating, it's creating a connection inside my environment. And then it's asking for the ID. And once I ask for the ID, I can get this ID from somewhere else. Like I can get the ID from the requests. And then the return here, it's a JSON structure. So you can also use an action to work with JSON. So I can put add an action, and then I can search for these data operations, and I have here parse JSON. And then I can tell from where this content is coming from, and it's coming from the get items, the body from these get items. And then I can tell to the connector what is expected. And then I will just save it and go to my Postman and play it again. This will call this logic app here. So I need to see another execution. And then going to the executions, I can see that my connector was used. I sent as an input the ID that I sent here in the call was ID 1, and then the output. And then I can use this parse JSON to get the structured data and then get the item, get the value. So for example, I could edit this logic app here. So let's edit a little bit. And instead of receiving the ID and the description, the item and the description, I want to use only ID in this case, and I want to use the title that is coming from the parse JSON. So it's the item. So I need to create this. When I call the API, this item tree will be used. So I'm gonna save this, and then I will run this script again. I'm gonna go back, refresh. I can see a new execution. And then I can see that I received an ID 1. I got the item 1, and I'm using this item 1 to create a new work item. So I'm sending the result from the structure that I received from the API, and then I created a new item here. So probably I have this item 1 created. So in this case, I'm calling my endpoint using the connector, doing some stuff here in my API, and then returning an output that in this case is the item. So you can create whatever you want in this case. Okay, so that's it basically. I know that it's rush. It's a lot of things that we need to talk about when we are creating logic apps and implementing these things for real in real scenarios. But this is a pretty simple example of how we can use. And in this case, I'm just getting some items in a list, but I could connect to a service that it's inside my company, or I could create an API that will do a lot of business logics and then will return some outputs or do calculations and things like that. So you can create a lot of different connectors and use those connectors to be available in your environment, and the users will create logic apps using your connectors. So it's pretty simple because I developed an API, and then instead of giving an URL for the user or for another developer, I'm just giving a connector telling, okay, send me the ID, and then we will return structured data for you. So it's pretty simple to apply this in, and it's easy to deploy, it's easy to manage, and it's easy to start building and using it for production. So that's it. Do we have any questions, comments?
Thanks for a great presentation, Douglas. Yes, we will now start the questions and answers part, and should you wish to ask a question, type it into the questions window now. Okay, first question, Douglas. Can I create a custom connector from another Logic app?
Yeah. This is another good thing. For example, in this case, we are using this action to receive an HTTP. And if we check, this is basically an endpoint. So we could create a connector that will use the same URL that I used here to call in the Postman. So I can use the same URL to create another this connector. So I could use one connector that it's calling another logic app and doing a bunch of stuff. So it's good because you can create different logic apps and then encapsulate your actions and then use those logic apps as endpoints to another mainly logic app that you want.
Okay, great. Next question. How does it work in relation to licensing for a Logic app?
Yeah, this is a good question because basically it's a service inside Azure. So this will consume it will basically run in a consumption way. So you can run a lot of different actions and different things. And then basically we have per action, or so every time that we do an action inside a logic app, it will get an execution. And if we are using a standard connector, it will be a price. And if you use enterprise connector, it's another price. But it's cheap if we think about the solutions that we can provide with that.
Great. In relation to your demo, why was the ID not shown as dynamic content?
Basically, here, let me just show you to edit in the edit mode. The ID wasn't showing because I was trying to use in this create work item. This title, it's a string type. So my ID is an integer. So in the dynamic content, when I am trying to use a data from one place to another, I need to select data that are in the same place. So if you want to use a different type that it's not available here, you can click in the see more and all the data will be displayed. So in this case, I want to use the ID, that it's an integer, but this field here is expecting a string. That's why the ID wasn't displayed here. So you can just go to the see more and all the actions will be available for you.
Brilliant. Douglas, on behalf of the ESPC community, thank you for taking the time today to complete this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for the time. Thank you everyone to watch this, and hopefully you guys learned something and can use this to start working with that.
Great. Thank you, Douglas. Okay, everybody, that is the end of the webinar today. Please see sharepointeurope.com for further details on all upcoming webinars, or visit our resource center for all previous episodes. As this is Azure Week, our next webinar is happening at the same time tomorrow, so please do join us. You can register for this at sharepointeurope.com/register-for-webinars. Thank you all for joining us today, and especially a big thank you again to Douglas Romão. On behalf of everyone, take care and goodbye.